I would call this an oft-delayed episode recording.
Yeah.
This zombie episode, originally scheduled for around Halloween.
Quite delayed.
And even today, it's been delayed several times.
This thing seems doomed to be delayed. But, well, I guess the wait is over.
I feel like I should apologize to our listeners.
Yeah, I feel like we need to do that on a regular basis, but maybe that's just me.
Well, yeah, I feel like we were a little too ambitious with this whole zombie episode thing.
Yeah.
But, it's finally happening. Maybe we won't do theme episodes again.
It's just not our thing.
I guess not.
I guess we'll have to figure out what our thing is.
Yeah, because our thing was going through the 10 doctors, or rather 11 doctors, but I guess that was only ever a temporary thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, one day we'll probably find it.
Someday.
We'll find our thing.
It'll happen organically.
There you go.
It will involve carbon.
As all the best things do.
I'm Tom Dickinson.
And I'm Louis Midas.
And this is The Cloister Room,
a podcast about Doctor Who and other things.
It could be that we should have chosen The Empty Child / The Doctor Dances, which are more zombie-esque.
True.
Even though The Unquiet Dead is more superficially similar.
That's true. Oh, well.
I like it, though. I like the episode.
It was a good episode.
Yeah, I like the whole Charles Dickens thing.
Yeah.
Fits in well with the Christmas special we just saw.
Indeed. Now, the story actually took place on Christmas Eve, right?
Yes.
So that's interesting. Because, it always sort of bothered me a little bit that the Ninth Doctor never got a Christmas special.
You can sort of think of this as one, even though it aired in the summer.
Right. So it's kind of a makeshift Christmas episode for the Ninth
It wasn't
Doctor,
very
which was
Christmassy.
nice. That's true.
But it was very Dickens-y.
And that counts for something.
Yeah, and I think Simon Callow did a very good job with that role.
Yes.
It was a good performance, and it was it's interesting because thinking about this, it's the third episode of the revived series.
Right.
And so for some people, it's their third episode ever of Doctor Who. And it's probably the episode that is the least focused of the first three on the Doctor and Rose.
Right.
In Rose, there are virtually no characters of significance other than the Doctor, Rose, Mickey, and Jackie.
Right.
And then in End of the World, it's mostly the Doctor and Rose and, I guess, Cassandra, who's the villain, and Jabe, the tree.
Ah, yes.
But this, starts with lots of non-Doctor and Rose stuff. The Undertaker, the Gwyneth character, and then Dickens, and the Doctor doesn't really sort of get into the action until a while into the story.
True.
Which is not uncommon in Doctor Who, but it's sort of a first, I guess, in terms of the new series.
Yeah, that is interesting. I also like how Rose dresses up, and she's wearing period clothing. And that's something... Was that something that was ever done in the classic series? Did they ever try to fit in?
Yes.
Okay.
Not always. I mean, sometimes they mentioned it and tried to do it, but sometimes they just didn't bother at all, which would seem to be the two options. Yeah, I'm making lots of intelligent comments about this episode. I don't know that there's much to say about the episode, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, it is an enjoyable episode. It has a very classic feel to it, I think.
Huh.
And maybe that's because it focuses less on the Doctor and Rose, whereas the relationship between the Doctor and the companion is very much a focus of the current iteration of Doctor Who.
That's true.
Less so previously, and this sort of harkens a little back to that.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't think of it in those terms, but I do definitely get that sense thinking about it.
And another thing I like about this episode is it kind of shows how foreign to our way of thinking the Doctor is. Especially Rose is outraged by the notion that we would let the Gelth use our corpses as their vehicles. But the Doctor is like, well, it's going to save their lives. Your morality is stupid, so shut up. And he's kind of harsh and mean about it.
Yeah.
Which I find kind of, I don't know, I like that.
Yeah, sure, why not?
Shut up, Rose. It's very different from, humans. God, I love humans, me. 10th Doctor sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, although I do have to say, Unquiet Dead was probably the episode I watched the least. And I'm not sure why that is.
Of the Christopher Eccleston ones, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, I don't think I liked it as much my first watching. I think I thought of it as kind of skippable. Like, I thought it was kind of disposable. I don't really think that anymore because I like it. I like it more every time I watch it. I mean, as we said before in the past, I really like Christopher Eccleston. So any episode with Christopher Eccleston, I just like to rewatch because I think he has a very interesting take on the Doctor, and I like seeing it. So,
yeah.
I mean, and I also, as we've sort of gained a distance from Rose as a character, I've sort of come to realize that everything I like about Rose is in the Christopher Eccleston season, and everything I don't like about Rose is pretty much in her appearances with David Tennant in season 2 and 4.
Aha.
I just totally interchangeably use the word season and series. But yeah, so I mean, I like watching series 1. And this gave me an excuse to do that.
Yeah, I know you've talked about the relationship that Rose had with the Ninth Doctor and it being different from the 10th Doctor, and I do have to agree. I do think Rose is better in series 1. I would have to agree with that.
Actually, I think one of the reasons I like it is because it's a little bit more complicated, because with the 10th Doctor, it's just she's in love with him, and that's it.
Right.
You'll see similar things on every television program you watch.
True.
Whereas here, I mean, you even sort of begin to get the idea that she wants something out of the Doctor. And you find out in Father's Day that she's sort of wanted to go back and meet her father. I don't remember. There was something she said in this episode that made me feel like they were hinting ahead towards that. But I don't remember what it was.
I don't think I can help you.
Yeah, you probably can't. You just can't. I first suggested to you many moons ago that it might be a good idea to read a Star Wars novel, and that Death Troopers seemed like a good one. And I stated to you my misunderstanding of the premise of the novel, that it was about zombies versus stormtroopers.
Oh, yeah, right. I remember that. Yeah, actually, it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of troopers involved in Death Troopers.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed by that, because it sounded kind of cool. I guess that's all marketing. So yeah, did you enjoy the novel?
I did. Possibly not as much as the other Star Wars novel that I read, because I have only read, this makes the second Star Wars novel I have ever read.
You've also read Shatterpoint.
Yes. I think I liked Shatterpoint a bit more.
Shatterpoint is sort of a paragon among Star Wars novels. Well, I mean, it is one of my favorites, at least.
But yeah, no, overall I did like the story, and I liked the, I didn't even really read the back cover, so I didn't really have a sense for what to expect from the book. I just dove right in, and so it was kind of interesting seeing. I knew that there were zombies involved, and it was interesting to see how that all came about. But it was so I didn't really. I mean, I actually looked at the back cover later on, and it mentions they find a derelict spaceship or whatever, or at least I think it was mentioned on the back cover. And so I feel like it was more fun for me not knowing anything about this story.
Yeah.
Because then it was like, ooh, there's this derelict spaceship. And I mean, it was like, oh, well, of course the virus is on there. So, I mean, duh. But I mean, still, it was fun to see how that all how it all unfolded, I'll say.
Yeah. I didn't know much going in, obviously, because, as I said before, misunderstood the premise. But, I have read very many Star Wars novels, and almost all of the Star Wars novels that I have read have involved at least one character, either from the movies or from other Star Wars novels that I've already read, right out of the gate. And so this novel, and I kind of knew this. I knew this already going in, that this novel would focus mainly not on characters I was familiar with. And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler because it happens about halfway through the book that Han Solo ends up turning up and becoming a major character.
Yeah.
But he it's not for quite a while into the novel.
Yeah, and that was another thing that came as a complete surprise to me.
Me as well.
I was like, oh my god, this is awesome. And I was just,
Yeah.
I was geeking out.
That was pretty cool.
But yeah, no, because that was something I was totally not expecting.
And unless I'm mistaken, I don't think the zombies were introduced until after that.
That's correct.
The zombies only come into the novel, I would say, at least halfway in.
Yeah, because what happens is, if I'm recalling correctly, Dr. Cody...
Well, let's do a little bit of a plot
Yeah.
summary, because anyone listening to this will probably not have read
True.
the novel.
Okay.
So you can go ahead if you want.
I mean, it does focus on a lot of different characters. I do recall it seems to start with focusing on 2 child inmates who are aboard this prison ship just trying to survive, and their father had recently died. And we don't really learn much about the father.
No, we don't. And it's an Imperial prison ship.
Yes, right.
Like, around the time... I think it's set before Star Wars A New Hope.
Yes.
Almost certainly.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely certainly, actually. Anyhow.
Yes. I remember they end up pretty early on getting their lives threatened by someone who I think is another inmate.
Yeah.
Kind of a gangster type dude.
A leader of a prison gang.
Yeah, that's it. And so he has put a price out on their heads, and so that's a concern for them, like it would be,
And meanwhile, we're hearing little bits and pieces about what happened with their father.
Right.
Every character who is important in the novel seems to have something to do with the mysterious incident that happened to their father.
True.
Which isn't ever really fully explained.
Right. I mean, there is that security guy. I always mispronounce these names because they're really weird.
Yeah, Star Wars names are weird. I think it was Sartoris.
Yeah, that was my second guess. My first guess was Sartoris, and I was like, no, that's probably the wrong inflection there. I'm probably supposed to stress the second syllable, so I was going to go with Sartoris. That was my guess.
But yeah. He knows something about what happened, and he's involved in it. So anyway, what happens, I will continue the plot summary.
Go right ahead.
They break down in open space, and in order to proceed, they're going to need to take parts from a derelict Star Destroyer, right, which just happens to be floating around in their area.
Just chilling.
And so some people go on there to check it out and to find parts and to figure out why is there this derelict Star Destroyer that no one knew about. And it turns out there are no living beings on board, and when they return to the prison barge, a mysterious plague is spread. And this is sort of where the plot kicks in. Mm-hmm. And for quite a long time, the plot is just about the spread of the plague, and then after everyone's dead, the very small number of people who have survived either because they were immune or because they were in solitary confinement, like how they sort of deal with stuff. And this goes on for quite a while before the people who have died from the plague begin walking again.
Right. And in the meantime, Sartoris escapes and then doesn't.
He unescapes.
Right. Yeah, Sartoris was the kind of character where I really wanted him to die.
Yeah, he's completely sociopathic, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
And I always find that interesting because, we get the perspective of him from time to time.
Yeah, I actually was kind of confused at first with how they were jumping around from perspective to perspective. I kind of got used to it, but at first it was kind of jarring.
That's very, very common in Star Wars novels. It wasn't at all jarring to me because that's how virtually all Star Wars novels are written. Shatterpoint is one of the few exceptions because it's purely in Mace Windu's point of view. Uh-huh. Or, I don't remember, was it? There might have been others.
If there were, I really don't recall them. It was funny. I'd like to focus a bit on Han Solo and Chewie being in the story because it was kind of interesting to me because it seems like a big kind of traumatic thingy, and I feel like I don't know. Like I know that canon is kind of a big thingy in Star Wars, and I know the movies take precedent over everything else, but it just seemed kind of weird putting them in this big situation where I feel like they should almost have been affected in some way by it.
I can agree with that, but on the other hand, the adventures of Han and Chewie prior to A New Hope are very common topics for Star Wars stories.
Okay.
In fact, for a very long time, up until the early 90s, the only things Star Wars authors were allowed to write about was the adventures of Han, Chewie, and Lando prior to A New Hope, because George Lucas didn't want them pushing the story forward, and he didn't want them getting into the background of Luke's father, because he wanted to make movies about that someday. So authors were very restricted in what they could write. So as a result, there's a lot of books written about Han and Chewie's earlier adventures, and a lot of them are big and epic in scale, because, that was all they could do. So you're right, I do think that... I think there's a sense in which the enormous amount of Star Wars material in general cheapens the movies. and sort of, I would almost go so far as to say it belittles the movies, which is something that we Star Wars fans just have to deal with. We have to sort of find ways of coping. I mean, I like the Star Wars Expanded Universe stuff, even though it belittles the movies, because I can sort of compartmentalize them through doublethink, like George Orwell kind of stuff.
All right, then. Yeah, I suppose that it's just my lack of familiarity with the expanded universe that this is a new sort of perspective for me to take on the Star Wars saga, if you will.
But anyhow, I think when you watch A New Hope, you kind of get the impression that Han and Chewie are bad guys, and that they become better people as a result of the events of A New Hope. Whereas this novel would sort of imply that they were already pretty good guys, because they're kind of heroic here.
That's true. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Now that I can see that they've gone on a lot of wild adventures and what have you, I can sort of see this as being just another day in their life. I can see that. But yeah, no, it does. I would say the same thing. I would say that I did get that impression from A New Hope that they were kind of bad guys.
Depending on whether or not Han shot first.
Right. Of course.
So this sort of fits in with the whole Greedo shot first ethos.
Indeed.
I don't know how much more can or should we say about the book.
I don't know.
Well, I just want to say I liked it overall.
Yeah, I did too.
It was very horror.
Yes.
Very gruesome. Like, my favorite scene is an early one that involves a lot of disembodied lungs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to almost have learned a little bit more about that. I feel like I wasn't satisfied with regard to that, but I guess it was a really cool scene.
I mean, it's a lot more gruesome and violent than your usual Star Wars product, and they really go for it, and it's sometimes interestingly gruesome and violent.
Very true. But yes, because I watched The Walking Dead and I read this book sort of at the same time, sort of. Not actually at the same... I wasn't...
right.
But it was interesting to sort of compare and contrast the actual zombies, because this is a very sort of sci-fi take on zombies, and it's kind of, I guess I don't really want to spoil this, but how they all interact with each other in this novel is a very cool way to do it, I think.
Yeah, it's done in a very science fictional way, and, I mean, early information that you learn about the disease before you even know about the zombies ends up becoming relevant to the ways the zombies operate.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like, it gave me a big, oh, that makes sense. Like, that kind of thing would happen a few times in the latter chapters of the novel.
Yeah.
But, the origin of the disease is still kind of mysterious at the end.
Yeah.
And the same author has actually written another novel set, 3,000 years earlier.
Ooh.
Which, according to the summary or what I've heard about it on the internet, it describes the origin of this disease.
Oh, cool.
It's called Red Harvest. I think there's an excerpt in the back of the paperback version of the book.
Oh, yes, I saw that, because I have the paperback.
Anyhow, one of the things I'm most excited about, the book Red Harvest, which I do intend to read soon, it involves the Jedi Service Corps, which is an obscure bit of Star Wars canon, which I think is just awesome.
Okay.
You know how you've seen Attack of the Clones, yes?
Yes.
You know, in Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan goes into a class of younglings that Yoda is teaching. Mm-hmm. And youngling in Star Wars is not just a word for child. It is a rank of Jedi.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It is that rank of Jedi. Before, when you're a child and you're growing up in the temple being taught Jedi basics and you haven't yet been selected by a Jedi Master to be a Padawan.
Okay.
And some younglings never get chosen to be a Padawan.
Oh.
They're the rejects.
Oh.
So they go into the Jedi Service Corps. Like the agricultural Jedi.
The what?
Like Jedi gardeners. Like...
So they got like a pair of light shears?
Basically. I don't know. But, actually there are a couple of different areas of the Jedi Service Corps, but they're all, not, field agent work, but they are, they're public service works.
Okay.
Let's put these people to good use. They're not completely useless. They do have the ability to use the Force to some extent, and they can do good. But yeah, I imagine that must be really sad.
Yeah, that'd be kind of depressing.
Yeah.
No one loved them enough to train them.
But I think one of them is a main character in Red Harvest.
Aha.
I say this based on my limited knowledge of this book, which could be completely wrong based on how wrong I was about Death Troopers.
Right. That's always a risk now.
Yeah. It will always be a risk going forward. You can't trust me anymore. when I tell you the premise of things. Yeah, so, The Walking Dead.
Those dead sure were walking.
What did you think, Lewis?
It was interesting because I think that had I not sat down and said, all right, I'm watching these 6 episodes, I think I wouldn't have liked it. I think I would have disliked the first episode and said, nah, this is not a show for me.
Really?
I think so. It was kind of weird because I don't know what it was. Maybe I was just kind of tired or something, but I just could not connect with any of the characters that I saw. Actually, no, that's not true. I liked the father and his son. I liked that in the first episode.
And those characters don't appear again.
No, they don't. So, it was a pretty good thing that I kind of got over that and started to like the main character. Because I feel like, I don't know, I was kind of ambivalent towards him at first.
You know, the first episode was my favorite, I think.
Really?
Yeah. I came to this realization, I mean, during this whole zombie theme thing, I learned a little something about myself. I learned that I'm not as much into zombies as I am into zombie apocalypse. The survival horror aspect doesn't grab me as much as the world ended aspect, the last remnants of humanity. So, for instance, Death Troopers is not a zombie apocalypse novel.
Right.
It's more of a survival horror zombie novel. I may not have liked it as much if not for the Star Wars connection, although I did like it. The Walking Dead is more zombie apocalypse along the lines of, say, 28 Days Later.
Yeah.
I find that more interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I think the first episode focuses a lot on that. There's very little conceiving of the zombies as a threat. They're more an abstract thing that has happened to the world.
Right.
And the first episode copes mostly with his dealing with the way the world has changed. And that's what's more interesting to me.
I didn't quite have that take on it, I guess. I think that it was, and this is going to sound strange, but I really almost thought there was too much gore.
Too much gore, really?
You know what it might have been? The point at which I was like, this is too much, I think was when it was at the towards the end of the episode with the horse.
I think you're an old lady.
You know what? I might be.
An old lady.
Well, and it was funny because I started liking the show more when they stopped doing so much of that gore stuff and sort of started to focus more on the survivors.
Was there less gore in the... Yeah, I think you're right. I think there was less gore in the episodes after that.
It seemed like they had toned it down a little, which is interesting. That was an interesting discovery about myself because I figured, yeah, gore.
We're just learning so much about ourselves today.
We are. Zombies are teaching us so much about life.
Zombies are the greatest teachers.
Yeah, I'm sure I read that somewhere.
I think that's on, like, a motivational poster. Yeah, anyhow. Sorry, what were you saying?
I honestly am not sure. Oh, you know what? It was... And you know what I really liked for some reason was seeing an old guy, because I got a very Left 4 Dead vibe. Because there's an old guy in Left 4 Dead.
I know little about Left 4 Dead, but I did like the old guy.
Yeah. He actually looked very much like the old guy in Left 4 Dead.
I thought, like, overall, in terms of the characters, it had its ups and downs. Without spoiling anything, it kills off characters that I'm not really sure I had any reason to care about.
Yeah.
And I think it would be more interesting to me if I did. But there are characters on the show that I am really interested in and like watching. And even some of the minor characters that only appear in one episode, like the father and son from the first episode. I think the father's a great character. I liked him a lot.
Yeah.
And also the guys they run into when they go back into Atlanta.
Oh yeah.
And I don't want to say much more about them because that's a nice surprise.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Once I saw there were multiple groups of survivors, I was constantly wondering what other types of groups of survivors we might come across throughout the course of the show, and so it was interesting to just see. I do have to say, I do agree. I like the zombie apocalypse kind of feel, and it's just nice to see after society has collapsed how people sort of cope. It's something that I have not thought about extensively, so to sort of get a more rich sense of how people handle that sort of thing is just kind of a thing I like. And I feel like that's something you can't really explore in a movie about zombies because it's just you have to focus on that one little arc, whereas with a show you can sort of say this is the world as it is now.
Right, and I think that was one of the things that initially made me so interested in The Walking Dead. A zombie movie ends, whereas The Walking Dead has no built-in end. And indeed, the comic book series it's based on is still going, and the writer says he has no definite end in mind, he's just going to keep going and going.
That's cool.
But, this is a pretty big but, I mean, if that was the one thing that interested me most in the series, it was disappointing to me that the first season was only 6 episodes.
That's true.
It sort of did feel like just a single, albeit very long, zombie movie.
That's true. They do. It is, yes, because they go from goal to goal, and there's like this big goal that they ultimately go to in the last episode. I don't know how much we want to talk about that.
Let's not talk about it.
All right.
And I think the reason that it was only 6 episodes long is they had to rush production because they were determined to have the show premiere on Halloween.
Ah, I gotcha.
And apparently that worked because it's been a huge ratings hit.
Yeah, right. It's been renewed, I believe.
It's already been renewed for a second season. I think it was renewed after the first episode aired.
Wow, that's cool.
And I'll be interested to see where it goes, because, again, without spoiling too much, it doesn't end with a very clear idea of what's next.
Right.
It ends much like you might expect a zombie movie to end, I guess. A depressing zombie movie.
Yes.
I mean, zombie movies are depressing.
Notable exception here is Shaun of the Dead, but that's not really...
No, you're right. That is an exception. And notable. And one that I'm guessing more than a few of our listeners will have seen.
Indeed.
Yeah, overall, I'm glad something like this exists on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people have accused it of not being very original, and I think that's probably correct.
Yeah.
But I feel like it has the potential to go to interesting places.
Yeah. I would agree.
And I think the second season is going to be 13 episodes.
Oh, that's good.
Which is more than double, so.
Indeed.
All right. You've been listening to The Cloister Room, which is a podcast about zombies. But usually it's a podcast about Doctor Who and other things.
Most of the time.
Yeah, except for this episode.
Yeah.
Which included Doctor Who and other things, but zombie-specific Doctor Who and other things. If you want to hear more episodes, they're up on iTunes. Subscribe to The Cloister Room, or go to thecloisterroom.com, where you can also leave a comment for us. But you can also tell us things about what you liked or didn't like or want us to know about by sending emails to thecloisterroom@gmail.com. Or you could follow The Cloister Room on Twitter @thecloisterroom. Or you could follow Lewis on Twitter.
Yeah, and I'm at Mila's Belly.
Yes, he is. He's there. And I'm at T. Dickinson, if you wanted to follow me on Twitter. But you don't. Until next week, I've been Tom Dickinson.
And I've been Lewis Midas.
And you've been listening to The Cloister Room. Goodbye.
Farewell.
Daryl, maybe. Daryl, I don't know.